Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we continue looking at the universal system that you can use against the queen's pawn opening, starting with 1d4. So this is one secret system that even grandmasters highly depend on if they don't want to be obvious. You're always going to be playing the same things over and over regardless of what white does in the opening stage, so you don't have to worry about knowing too much opening theory. Right. Let's get into the video. So in my yesterday's tutorial video, we looked at these examples to do with the problems of the Perk and the King's Indian defense. And just a quick recap before we get into today's exciting study. I said while the Perk defense is a good opening response to the King's Pawn game, one of the variations that kinds of disturbs it is the 150 attack, among many other opening variations. So this is where white decides to castle long after developing the dark squared bishop, then play queen d2, and then later on start attacking on the king side like this with his pawns. This forces black to start playing unnatural moves like c6, b5, queen a5, thus abandoning the king side completely. Because if you just go ahead and castle short, white will start hitting you with moves like h4, h5, g4, g5. They will break open your king side and most likely crush you on the king side before you even start attacking on the queen side. The same turns out to be true even when it comes to the King's Indian defense, where you fianchetto your dark squared bishop on the king side like this and then you castle short. Oftentimes, white may play this move pawn to f3 or f4 and then start pawn storming on the king side with these two highlighted pawns, especially h4, h5. Like it or not, your queen side development won't always be as fast as white's king side development. So again, listen, the purpose is to play the Perk defense or the King's Indian defense without having to worry about our closed c file. So that's why we'll always start with c5 to give up our c pawn so that we can remain with an open c file to attack white's king if they castle long. And then here is a universal system that I recommended. Against pawn to d4, you just go d6. Bingo! And this is where you will see the game going in different directions. For example, white may play pawn to c4, which I already covered in my yesterday's video. White may also play pawn to e3 right on move 2, which I also looked at. So that means in today's video, we're only focusing on the knight f3 line and the bishop f4 line, the London version. And of course, we're going to start with the knight f3 line. Again, remember that I said regardless of what white does, we're always going to be playing the same opening moves, at least in the opening stage, beginning with d6 followed by c5 and then queen a5 check. Then in most cases, we're going to be taking on c5, and if any attack comes like bishop e3 attacking our queen, the first safe square we want to think of for our queen is the a5 square. So we'll put our queen on a5, and then at worst we always have the c7 square for our queen. Done. So after knight f3 on move 2, like always, you go pawn to c5 first. If pawn takes, you simply go queen a5 check. If bishop d2 is played, you're gonna take back right away. If knight c3, you have two options. Stockfish likes d takes c5 since your queen can never be attacked on a5, and that's okay. But anyways, sticking to our plan, after knight c3, obviously you need to take on c5, and after pawn to e4. This is when you continue playing your Perk defense ideas with pawn to g6, knight f6, and bishop g7, followed by castle short in the near future. But after pawn to e4, white is preparing to go bishop e3, and you're going to see my top recommendation once again. So just go knight f6, you continue playing your Perk, and after bishop e3, once again I said queen c7 is good, but queen a5 is better because it creates pressure on e4. So always think of queen a5 first before thinking of queen c7. Queen a5 pins the knight, so the e4 pawn becomes vulnerable. And you know what's funny in this position? If you check the Masters database, black has never lost a game in this position, which should give you much confidence in what I'm teaching you right now. This is what people play in classical tournaments or TB. Anyway, the top played move in the Lichess database is bishop d3 in this position, just defending their e4 pawn. And now this is when you can go pawn to g6. You continue playing your normal perk defense, since you already have an open c file to attack should white castle long. And knight g4 is coming. By the way, knight g4 is a very cool move that you always need to play whenever you have a chance. Write that down. This is the biggest secret I'm giving you guys. Don't just rush to castle short and then develop your knight d7. Whenever you have a chance, play knight g4 and then get rid of that dark squared bishop so that you can free up your flankered bishop. Anyways, to prevent knight g4, white may play pawn to h3 so that you don't take their bishop. And then this is when you castle short, and then probably they're going to castle long. And then guess what? You have a lot of things that you can do apart from e5, of course, because that will leave your d6 pawn to be very weak. You start playing passive moves to defend it. So the move that you can play right in its position is simply bishop e6. And your middle game plan will be as follows. You'll play knight d7, you'll play knight e5, you'll play pawn to b5, you'll play knight c6, you'll play s6. You can start with any move order you like depending on what white is doing. Right, so again, d4, d6, still in the knight f3 line where you go c5, and we saw what happens if pawn takes. You just go queen f5 and take back that c pawn. But what if white plays pawn to d5 in this position? What did I say in my yesterday's video? This is when you are supposed to start getting ready for the possible Benko Gambit transposition. So anticipating pawn to c4, you first of all go on knight f6, intending to play your perk defense on the king side, right? And then the moment you see pawn to c4, instead of going pawn to g6, you better go pawn to b5 immediately. Why? Because if you go pawn to g6 first, white may play knight c3 and you won't have your Benko Gambit. So better go b5 so that if cb happens, the top played move, now you go a6 as if you're playing the wing gambit, right? We saw what happens if white takes on a6 in my yesterday's video, so I'm not gonna waste much time on this. Let's look at something else that white can do here. Instead of taking, what if they play pawn to e3 or b6? Whatever. So here you can just continue with your perk defense ideas. If they take, wait a second, this is when you take with your bishop, not your knight. By the way, you want to keep it so simple, simplifying the game. In this position, if you want, you can take on a6, that's okay. But what I like doing to oversimplify the game is to go queen a5 check first, and if bishop d2 or knight c3 is played, this is when I take the bishop with my queen, because this stops white from castling short. Unless they just want to exchange queens, we don't have any issues with that. As black, we have limited options, so just continue with your perk. After queen takes, you take with your knight. Yes, even though we are down a pawn, our position is better than white's according to Stockfish. You can check the eval bar. As I said, these pawns don't go anywhere in the Benko Gambit. And I'm not saying this is the Benko Gambit, by the way. It's just one of those transpositions that may lead to the actual Benko Gambit. The B pawn is met by our C pawn, and we have many pieces that stops that A2 pawn. So you don't have to worry about these. Castle short, and then after e4, think of the plans that I showed you in the first part of this video, where you go knight d7 first, knight b6, and then knight c4 to pressurize the b2 pawn, which is also indirectly attacked by our dark squared bishop. Or go knight d7 first, then knight e5. It all depends with what you want to do. In the long term, you want to play rook b8 and start controlling the b file and the a file with your rooks. End of line. Now we move on to the bishop f4 line. But before we do that, our new e5 defense course is still selling. People are getting it more than we expected. And yes, it's worth it because you're going to learn how to crash the Italian game, beat the Scotch game, the Scotch Gambit. You will learn how to defeat the bishop's opening, even Gotham's favorite Vienna Gambit and the Vienna game. You will learn how to fight in the 4 knights game, how to beat the 3 knights opening, the Goring Gambit, and things like that. So it's a complete e5 defense course that you can find on our website or on our Patreon page. All the links are in the comment section down below. And hey, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. This is how you support this channel. In case you didn't know, we won't ask you for donations or any financial assistance apart from advertising our courses to you. Thank you so much for your support. Let's continue. So now we look at the London version of this system. Again, d4, you go d6. Now this time, say white plays bishop f4. Again, what do you play? You start with c5, quite alright. If d takes, you go queen a5 check, right? That's okay, because this is a system. You play the same things over and over. But there's also a principle in chess, or a concept that we call the superseding concept. So this is one concept that allows us to compromise or play freestyle chess, for lack of better terms, where one rule may supersede another if and only if that will result to a better position. For example, in this position, instead of queen a5, this is the only time in our universal system where you can play the move e5. Because e5 comes with an attack on the bishop. So this is the only thing to remember. We only want to play e5 in the London version of our universal system. So white is going to play bishop g3. And now this is when you simply go queen a5 check, because you want to take like this. It now makes sense. For example, after knight c3 blocking the check, now you can take on c5. And see, if white plays knight a4, what did I say? Should you go queen c7 or queen a5? Better go queen a5 check. Or you can go queen b5 in this position, which also attacks the b2 pawn indirectly and the knight. But anyways, after e4 is played, just go knight f6. And again, if knight a4, you have queen a5 check and queen c7 in the near future. If knight f3 is played, now you go bishop e7. What's the difference? This time we didn't play our perk defense setup for one reason, because we already moved our e pawn e5. The perk defense usually makes sense if we still have a pawn on e7 to avoid having many weaknesses. So bishop e7 makes more sense, as if we are playing the normal king's pawn game. After bishop b5 check, you go knight c6, castle short, castle short. And now in the view of bishop g4, white will usually play h3 to stop that. But if you look at this position very well, you can already see some possible tactics. For example, white's knight on c3 is overused. In other words, it's overutilized. It's defending the light squared bishop and also the pawn on e4. So why not taking that e4 pawn? Because if knight takes, we're going to take the bishop. Or probably if white starts with this intermediate move, we may end up being up a pawn with a superior position after knight takes c3, attacking the queen, and after pawn takes, we then take on c6 with our queen or our b pawn. What just happened? We remained with a bishop pair and a beautiful pawn structure, a better position, right? Again, back to our initial position after d4, d6, and white plays bishop f4. I said always start with pawn to c5, and after d takes, you simply go bishop e5, since this comes with tempo. We saw what happens if white plays bishop g3. But what if they play bishop d2 in this position, just retreating their bishop, obviously stopping you from going queen f5 check and win this? Well, this is worse. Actually, you can go pawn to d5 here, because you want to take the c5 pawn like this. And if they play b4 trying to hold on to their c pawn, what do you do in the queen's gambit to take advantage of this pawn chain on the queen side? You start with a5 always, because if a3 is played, you are just going to take. For example, if a3 is played, you're just going to take, and after bishop takes, trying to hold on to their extra pawn, now you go b6. This is how we attack these pawn chains from the queen side. We're going to get back our pawn. And if white plays pawn to c3 instead of a3 like this, you still take, and after pawn takes, you go b6 just like before. If cb is played, you go queen takes b6, and once again there's nothing that white can do to stop us from getting back the pawn. If a3 is played, you can just go knight f6, you just continue playing other moves. If you think about it, this kinda looks like the improved Benko Gambit with our two advanced pawns on the center. So you're warm and dry, you're good to go. These pawns won't go anywhere. If anything, they're just a liability for white. And this is why Stockfish says the position is dead equal. Now, after bishop f4 and pawn to c5, what if white doesn't take and say they play pawn to d5? You know, just like in the d takes c5 line, this is where Stockfish permits to go pawn to e5. Once again, just like in the D takes C5 line. And this kind of looks like the check Benoni, which I covered in one of my courses. You can check it out on my website or on my Patreon page. The thing is, if bishop G3, well and good. Now you are dominating as if you are playing white pieces. You can even go pawn to F5 in this position. Look at these beautiful pawns. You will play knight, bishop E7, castle short, A6, B5, bishop B7, knight D. Oh my god. And in the near future, after playing knight D7, you can relocate your queen's knight to the king's side, putting it on G6. Learn these ideas. So this will be very simple if white retreats his bishop like this. So maybe the best I can do is just to take. But even after this, you don't have to take with your F pawn. You can just go ahead and take with your last squad bishop. This is super great for black. Say knight c3 is played. Now you can go knight f6, say pawn to e4. You go knight c6, stopping pawn to e5, right? If knight f3 is played, you can go bishop e7, simple chess. Sometimes you will see them playing knight g5, trying to get rid of one of your bishops, or rather your bishop pair, but you can just castle short, because if they take, you're going to have a semi-open file like this, and you're ready to go pawn to e5, by the way. So this is very great for black with no any weaknesses. Now, in blitz and bullet, especially in bullet, you're going to see a lot of sidelines because white doesn't know your plans. So after d4 and you play d6, obviously they'll play something like knight to f3 here. This is what usually happens to me. And after you go c5, most of the times they don't even take, especially in bullet, because they just don't expect you to play pawn to c5 right away. They play moves like pawn to e3, but whenever white doesn't take, you can just go ahead and take first, and this is where they take back with their e-pawn. Word of advice, from here you can just continue playing your normal perk defense and castle short, and not forgetting knight c6, bishop g4, just a normal game. This becomes way easier. Another sideline is where white plays pawn to c4 on move number 2, and after you go c5, they don't see d5 or pawn takes, say they just go knight f3. This is what happens. So if they don't take your c-pawn, or if they don't advance their pawn, you just take. And after knight takes, here you can go knight c6 first, and probably once the dust settles, you start playing your usual peg defense ideas because your c file is open in case white castles long. Word of advice, when you play your perk setup, you don't want to go pawn to e5 in this particular variation unless in the bishop f4 line, or unless white plays bishop f4, that's when you want to go pawn to e5 with tempo. Another sideline, say after d4, d6 and pawn to e3, after you go c5, they might not take or advance, but rather go knight f3. If they don't take, you just take. Or say white plays pawn to c3, again you can just take. After they take, you continue playing your normal perk defense. Remember, the goal is to play the normal perk or the purest defense, but with an improved position. For example, here I would even play something like a6 as if I'm playing the Nudge of Sicilian, also stopping bishop b5 check. And after knight f3, I would go knight f6. If knight c3 is played, I would go pawn to g6, say bishop d3, you go bishop g7. After h3, I would play castle short, or maybe something like pawn to b5 because I want to fianchetto my last squad bishop first. Say pawn to e4 for some reason, and I'll go bishop b7, castle short, and then I continue playing normal chess. For example, a3, I go knight c6 to support e5, and after bishop e3, this is when it makes sense for me to go pawn to e5, like really, because if pawn takes, I'm gonna take. Or first of all, go rook c8, because rooks smile on open files, and continue playing normal chess. So these are some of the ways in which you can continue playing, even if white doesn't take your c5 pawn, or if they don't advance. These are just sidelines, right? Now, time for you to go and check out my new E5 defense course, which I have also linked in the comment section down below. And I'm glad to say, so far it has received a lot of attention and people are getting it like crazy. So it's an opening response that you try against white's E4 opening. You're going to learn how to play against the Scotch, the Ruy Lopez, the Bishop's opening, 3 Knights opening, the 4 Knights game, the Vienna game, even the Italian game. So it's the complete E5 defense course that I just launched with my team. You better go and check it out. Thank you so much for watching this video. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye bye.